From Netflix turning Resident Evil into a same-old teenage drama series, the final chapter completely disregarded the storylines of the previous movies. Here are the worst Resident Evil movies and TV shows. Starting off with the most recent addition to the franchise, I'm talking about Resident Evil, the Netflix series. This TV show takes place almost 30 years after the deadly T-virus was first found. An outbreak shows that the Umbrella Corporation has been doing biological warfare in their lab for decades, which is obviously a dark secret. Sounds like a pretty okay premise, right? Well, even though it has the lowest IMDb rating of the series, critics gave it a fairly high score of 55% on Rotten Tomatoes because they liked it as a standalone movie. Audiences, though, only gave it a score of 27%, and fans of the video game series were even less pleased. A lot of people on Reddit were pointing out how this entire series is just based on annoying teenagers messing things up. Someone even went as far as to say they changed a zombie science fiction show into a soap story for 12-year-old girls. Some die-hard fans said that just the first episode was so far off from the games that they stopped watching it. Yeesh, that sounds pretty bad. In some cases, though, I guess even when the story wasn't all that bad, the movie still wasn't fun enough for the fans to stay interested. Take Welcome to Raccoon City, for example. This 2021 movie was kind of attempting to tell the story of the games and source material.
I think, of course, you got to appeal to two completely different audiences. Number one, you want to satisfy the hardcore fans of the game because they're so invested in something that they've played over and over and spent so much time giving love to.
And it did so much better than the live-action Resident Evil movies, which were mostly action scenes and extravaganzas. On one hand, the movie got a lot of praise from fans of the games, and it's because it treated Capcom's horror series with much more respect than any of the other movies. But then the movie has also been attacked for being too safe and straddling the line between a horror movie and an action movie. This installment did introduce some pretty cool game characters, like Claire Redfield and Chris Redfield. And it also shows how the events of Resident Evil 2 connect to those of the 1996 game by Takuro Fujiwara, which, if you don't know already, was the first Resident Evil game that started an entire empire of its own. But apart from the bedazzling new characters, the movie didn't really bring in that wow factor people usually expect from this franchise. I don't really know what's worse, watching a movie that has barely anything going on, or one that has so many things floating around in the air that it's hard to keep up. Because Retribution definitely made it seem like it was just trying to show us a million different things without making any sense. To be more precise, Retribution is a cringe-worthy example of what happens when you try to make all of the different Resident Evil movies fit together.
To be honest, I didn't really appreciate what it was like to be a superhero until I played a normal person within the Resident Evil world. And normal people have it really bad. They just run and scream and get killed.
In this one, Claire Redfield is gone, and her brother Chris, who finally showed up in the afterlife, has also vanished. In fact, Albert Wesker is the only character from Afterlife who comes back, even though the last time we saw him, he was being destroyed. But you see, Retribution doesn't care to explain this or why Wesker is suddenly on Alice's side. I mean, sure, other than the weak plot point that the real bad guy is the Red Queen from the first movie. All in all, this movie is 95 minutes of the worst parts of the series. If you look at the clone plot, it literally just falls apart and is just a way to bring back Michelle Rodriguez and Colin Salmon.
Man, I got a lot of respect for this Russian hardcore broad right here. Lots of love for the franchise. So, I begged Paul's ass as soon as I saw that they were making a movie, years ago.
At least with Welcome to Raccoon City, they had some of the gamer fans who were still into the movie. But when it comes to Retribution, it's just a mess of fan service and callbacks that don't make sense and that no one asked for. When it comes to the story, at least, you'd think the showrunners would pay extra attention to building it better, right? Well, Retribution wasn't the only one they messed up. It looks like they completely forgot about tying in the previous movies when it came to the final chapter. Before going into that, though,
So, we all live our normal everyday lives, and it's not every day that you can go into the Resident Evil world. Yeah. And it's all there, the zombies, the post-apocalyptic landscapes, the amazing sets, the amazing stunts.
It's just so much fun.
The cuts in the movie are so fast and annoying that it can be hard to watch at times. The movie also has the boldest theme, and that's basically how rich people will hide away in their bunkers and let the rest of the world die if all hell breaks loose. At the same time, the fact that Alice, Alicia Marcus, and the Red Queen are all part of the core triple goddess figure, it adds a lot of depth to Alice. Credit where credit's due. But let's also not forget that the final chapter is the worst of the series' tendency to ignore what happened in earlier movies. Like, remember the previously on Resident Evil explanation? It literally sounds like it was written by someone who has never even seen the movies. According to the story, Wesker is now bad again. The Red Queen is now good. None of the heroes who aren't Alice are mentioned, and even the origins of the T-virus have changed. In the end, it seems like having seen the other 4 movies doesn't add much to the experience, which is a strange irony for a movie called The Final Chapter. Then we have a movie that gave us contradictions over contradictions, aka Afterlife. To put it simply, Afterlife just doesn't deliver.
I'm attached to her now. I'm attached to the story. Where's it gonna go? You know, we're always excited writing these new scripts, like wondering what's gonna happen to everybody and where this is gonna take us. And
the clones attack on Umbrella starts and ends in the first few minutes. Then the clones are killed, and Alice loses her superhuman powers. From here on out, the movie turns into a pretty standard zombie movie, with a group of survivors trying to leave a building full of zombies while also fighting the worst parts of people. Even more annoying is the fact that Anderson can't let his movies just stop. This movie in particular has a great natural finish, where Alice and her friends are in charge of a big zombie-free boat and are getting ready to travel around the world to help survivors. It sounds like a great idea for a sequel, but the last scene, the scene in which Umbrella troops board the ship, shows that none of this is happening. So, Afterlife becomes the perfect example of a Resident Evil movie, and by that I mean that it's a surprisingly good standalone film that falls apart under the weight of the bigger series. I guess that still isn't as bad as a movie getting categorized as cliche. We have Apocalypse taking the lead in that one. I can imagine being the first sequel to Resident Evil can come with a lot of pressure, because the movie walks a fine line between continuing the story of the first one while still being completely different from it, as opposed to the first Resident Evil movie that does a good job of using the protagonist with amnesia trope, along with the tried and true horror formula of getting rid of people one by one. Apocalypse takes a sharp turn to the left and becomes an action movie, solidifying Alice's place as the series' butt-kicking protagonist. It also has a more open setting, with bigger guns and more at stake. To be fair, this is a natural progression of what's happened before. The last scene of Resident Evil suggests that a bigger scope was always the plan, and Apocalypse does a good job of expanding on previous plot points. The bad thing about all of this is that it falls into too many action genre traps, not to mention that it relies too much on stereotypes, which gets super annoying. But if you can get past that, I guess you have a subpar movie with very few moving moments of humanity. That's all for revealing the worst Resident Evil movies and TV shows.